What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt, and today I wanted to take a look at some old cards considered to be cube staples and decide whether we want to keep playing them or not. It's really important in Cube to reevaluate what a card is bringing to your cube. Is it outclassed? I noticed that a lot of cubers are reticent about playing new cards. They get attached to their old cards, or they think there's nothing better than those old cards. So today I'm going to pick 5 cards and we're going to talk about whether or not they're still relevant in Cube. Now, before I do this, I do want to point out that cube size has a lot to do with how relevant a card is. And actually we're going to see that with our first card. So, let's get started. Now, our first card is actually really easy to evaluate because it's a vanilla. Isamaru, the Hound of Kanda. For 1 white, you get a 2/2 hound. Period. So, since this creature has no abilities, we're basically playing it for its body. So if his body isn't relevant, then we can easily subtract him from our cube. Now, Isamaru sees play in Cube because he is a staple of white aggro, right? He's a white 2/2 1-drop, so a 2/2 body on turn 1 feels pretty good. But let's see if it actually is pretty good. There are plenty of white 2/1 creatures in Cube for 1 mana. So what that means is that we're playing Kanda for his 2 toughness defense. Well, let's take a look at how relevant that is. In Cube, there are very few creatures with 1 power that Kanda would survive combat with, that he wouldn't trade with. And those cards are listed here for you. Birds of Paradise, Goblin Welder, Delver of Secrets, Landwar Elves, Mother of Runes. The thing is, if you attack in with Kanda, your opponents aren't going to block with these creatures. And your opponents aren't going to attack you with these creatures either because they're going to leave them up for other effects like mana, or Delver because they're trying to flip him, or Mother of Runes so they can give her protection and keep her on the board. The fact of the matter is that if you look at the list of average small creatures in Cube, there aren't any 1/1s, which means that Kanda's 2 toughness defense actually isn't relevant at all. He might as well be a 2/1 because he still trades that way. Now what I have for you here is a list of alternative 1-drops. In fact, the first 6 are 2/1s. They're all actually the same as Kanda because we already discussed his 2 toughness defense is irrelevant. But each one of these 2/1s has an upside. Dauntless Bodyguard protects a permanent. Kytheon flips into Gideon, which is awesome. Student of Warfare can become a 3/3 first striker on turn 2. Mardu Woe Reaper enters the battlefield and you get to exile a creature from your graveyard and gain a life. So, life gain, that's solid. And then Dragon Hunter, while probably not relevant, does have protection from dragons, and it can block dragons as though it has reach. Now, you're probably not running a lot of dragons, but Thundermaw Hellkite, Glorybringer, Mirrorwing Dragon, all of them see some cube play, and so perhaps Dragon Hunter is relevant for you. Now, Thraben Inspector is nice because he comes down and he does net you with cards, and Mother of Runes is probably one of my first includes for Cube over all of these others just because her effect is so powerful. The ability to protect herself or to protect a big creature or to let that creature swing in because it has protection and can't be blocked is amazing. So where does all of this leave Kanda? So I actually think Kanda is relevant in Cube. I just don't think he's relevant in small cubes. If you're at 360 cards, maybe 400, literally all of the cards that I just showed you are probably better alternatives to Kanda. So, that takes care of white. Let's take a look and see what blue has to offer. Okay, I know this card sees a ton of play. Don't jump down my throat, let's just talk about it. This is Whirler Rogue. For 2 colorless and double blue, we get a creature, human, rogue, artificer. Love creature types. When Whirler Rogue enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter creature tokens with flying. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. Now, there's a lot of upside to Whirler Rogue. Number 1, he passes the Vindicate test. You get bodies when he comes into play. 2, he adds to some artifact synergy, which cubes do play, especially with blue and artifacts. And I also like that he's budget. Right? You don't have to break the bank on playing Whirler Rogue, and if you are concerned about budget, there's no shame in playing Whirler Rogue. I think it's a fine card. But is it the best blue 4-drop? Let's evaluate. So here are some other really popular blue 4-drops, and I know I kind of cheated with Phyrexian Metalmorph, and maybe we should do a video on miscategorized cards, because technically Metalmorph could be played in any deck. He comes into the battlefield, he copies any artifact or creature on the battlefield, except that it's an artifact in addition to its other types, so it kind of scales with your opponent, which is kind of neat, and it can copy your stuff too. Venser Shaper Savant is like holding a counterspell in your hand with a body, because he can come in, stop that spell, basically time walk your opponent and hit the board, or he can come in and bounce a permanent, which is really, really strong. Glenalindra Archmage is actually one of my picks for the best blue 4-drop. She's flying and counterspell on a body, and my favorite part is that she persists, which means after you counter the first spell, she comes back and you can counter a second one. So really, really strong. Sower of Temptation enters the battlefield and gains control of a creature so long as he remains on the battlefield, so that steal effect is really strong in Cube, because chances are your opponent has some great, great creatures, because we're in Cube and all the creatures are good. Talrand the Sky Summoner is great in a Spells Matter deck, making 2/2 Drakes is a lot of bodies, super helpful. And Dungeon Geist enters the battlefield and locks down your opponent's biggest threat. Also a really strong effect. And I feel like these cards do more of what blue wants to do. They're more control-y, they take over the game, they stop your opponents from doing what they want to do. Whereas I feel like Whirler Rogue is solid, but I don't necessarily think she controls the board as well as these 4-drops. I would also point out that if you're playing Blue Devotion in your cube with cards like Thassa or Master of Ways, that Sower of Temptation, Talrand, Dungeon Geist, and Venser all still help support that archetype. So, let's think back to Whirler Rogue. So Whirler Rogue is probably not as powerful as any of the 6 4-drops that I just showed you, but again, we're just reevaluating. I'm not saying you can't play this card. I think Whirler Rogue is a fine card. She's very good. She's just not necessarily the best 4-drop we could be playing. And again, cube size matters. Larger cubes probably have room for Whirler Rogue. But I think if you are 450 and under, that there are maybe some better choices that you could be playing. Let's take a look at another card. This is Crypt Breaker. Crypt Breaker is a black 1-drop creature zombie. You may pay 2, discard a card, and put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. You can tap 3 untapped zombies you control to draw a card and lose 1 life. This is actually a card I think that maybe needs to come out of a lot of cubes. The discard outlet can be really relevant, I'm not going to lie. But it requires zombie support to be any good. I mean, odds are you're not going to make a whole bunch of zombie tokens before your opponent answers Crypt Breaker. Also, he's a 1-drop, which feels out of place. Most of the black 1-drops are more aggressive. They're 2/1s or 2/2 creatures that are meant to swing in, and let's be honest, you're never swinging in with Crypt Breaker. So, on turn 1, you tap, you play Crypt Breaker. On turn 2, you tap out, you discard a card, and you get a 2/2 zombie, so you're not swinging in till turn 3 at the earliest. So aggro decks don't want Crypt Breaker. In fact, it feels like a more mid-rangey card, but it's a 1-drop. So it feels like a card that's confused about its purpose. And I'll point out again, the discard outlet can be relevant, but what if you don't have anything in your opening hand that you want to put in your graveyard? If that's the case, you're not going to want to discard for this guy because cube cards are good. You don't want to be tossing cube cards for 2/2 zombies. I think this guy is actually just a poor man's pack rat. Let's take a look at some other 1-drops that we should be playing instead of Crypt Breaker. I like literally all of these 1-drops over Crypt Breaker. Bloodsoaked Champion is the best 1-drop in cube. Gutterbones and Dread Wanderer have recursion value. Carnifage is super aggressive early and doesn't come into play tapped like a lot of these guys. Gravecrawler for your zombie tribal. Diagraph Ghoul enters the battlefield tapped, but that's the only downside. I like all of them better than Crypt Breaker. To me, Crypt Breaker feels like a trap card for your drafters. It's a card they're going to look at, think that they're going to get some good value off of, and play on turn 1, and in actuality, it's probably not really a 1-drop. You probably don't want to actually play this card on turn 1, and it's misleading. So I think unless your cube is huge, you play all of the other black 1-drops instead of Crypt Breaker. Only a cube of 450 plus cards is going to want Crypt Breaker, and quite frankly, maybe not even then. Avalanche Riders is another really popular cube card, and if you're playing in a peasant cube, I can understand why. But if you're playing in a stronger, more powerful cube, it might be time to rethink this card. Okay, so for 3 and a red, you get a Nomad with Echo, which means you have to pay for him again on your next upkeep or sacrifice him. Avalanche Riders is unaffected by Summoning Sickness. When it comes into play, destroy target land. Let me start with, I hate Echo. Echo sucks. I don't want to pay for my creature twice. But it can also be abusable if you have a way to recur him or blink him so that you can get his effect multiple times. but if you're going to end up paying the Echo, it actually ties up your mana for 2 turns. This means it's a 2/2 land destruction spell for 8. That is not a good rate. The last thing I want to point out is that the red 4-drop spot is really crowded in Cube, so if you're still playing Avalanche Riders, it's probably time to update. Flame Tongue Kavu, affectionately called FTK, is probably the best 4-drop in Cube. Now I'll admit the effect is boring, but it's super powerful. When he enters the battlefield, you deal 4 damage to a creature. If you're playing red aggro, this is your favorite thing to play on turn 4. Blow something up and swing back in. Hazoret is also really good in Cube, especially if you're supporting a Sly or mono red archetype in your queue. The guy's indestructible, you're gonna be low on cards by the time you get to him on turn 4, and he offers a way to finish out your opponent on a body, which is really nice. Pia and Kiran Nalaar is another Cube staple, making bodies and dealing damage. Perforos is a win condition, especially if you're in some kind of crazy token deck. And Hellrider is also really good because all your creatures are effectively dealing 1 more damage. And I would play any of these 4-drops over Avalanche Riders. These guys start to close out the game, and Avalanche Rider says, "Hey, you, lose a land," and then I'll swing in for 2. Hazoret says, "Hey, you, take 5 to the face, and even if you can block, that's cool, because I can deal you 2 damage anyway, and I'm going to do it all again the next turn, and you can play something else on the next turn, because I don't have Echo." So, unless you're in a gigantic cube, or you're heavily supporting a land destruction theme in red, I really think it's probably time to retire Avalanche Riders. Wizards is constantly giving us great new 4-drops for red, and I think this card is finally past its prime. Let's look at our last card. Den Protector sees a ton of cube play, so let's take a minute and talk about him. For 1 and a green, you get a human warrior. Creatures with power less than Den Protector's power can't block. You can morph it for 1 and a green. When he is turned faced up, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So, Den Protector is regrowth on a body. But there are a few downsides to him. Number 1, he's not a 2-drop, he's a 3-drop. Because if you play him on turn 2, then you're not going to get a regrowth payoff. This means you're going to play him on turn 3, flip him on turn 4, and odds are when you flip him on turn 4, there's nothing in your graveyard to take advantage of because it's so early in the game. Also, I don't really like morphs in Cube, unless you're playing a lot of them. If this is your only morph, then it's not going to be a secret what it is when you play it face down, and opponents are going to be able to anticipate and perhaps even play around its effect. And then lastly, the first line of text on this card is irrelevant. We've already talked about this once, but there aren't any 1-power creatures in Cube that were going to block Den Protector anyway. So the only way to keep him from being blocked by anything that's 2 or higher is to use a pump spell on him or some kind of equipment, which again requires more mana investment on subsequent turns. So I don't really like the Den Protector. So what could we be playing in his place? One of the upsides of the Den Protector is he is not your typical mana dork, so I've included a few options here for you that aren't mana dorks to show you what else you could be playing. Fauna Shaman is a discard outlet that also lets you find new, better, more situational creatures. Duskwatch Recruiter lets you look at the top cards of your deck and filter the better ones into your hand, and of course it always has the possibility of flipping into a better werewolf. Tarmogoyf is just a classic beater, although I will openly admit that he is cost restrictive. Wall of Blossoms nets you a card, and then I've got 3 good ramp creatures on the end that you might add to your cube. Wall of Roots blocks and creates mana, Lotus Cobra interacts beautifully with fetch lands, and Sakura Tribe Elder, aka Steve, is a cube staple, and if you're not playing it, you need to be. There are lots of other 2-drop mana dorks, and I'm not going to bother to list them all here, but needless to say, if that's what you want, it's easy to find. So where does this leave us with the Den Protector? Well, I think he's a card whose time has come. There are so many great green 2-drops that the Den Protector probably doesn't see play unless you're heavily supporting Morph or unless your cube is upwards of 720 cards. Well, that's going to do it for today, Cubers. Feel free to like and subscribe, it really helps out. If you think I got anything wrong, please let us know in the comments below, and if you have a suggestion for our card of the week, let us know in the comments below. This is your boy Matt telling you to shuffle up and keep cubing, my friends.